am telling, I tell it in retirement communities, I tell it schools, because I not only tell for adults, I tell for children as well. I tell local organizations like the Red Hat Society or the Southwest Florida Symphony organization that supports the symphony. And I'm telling for a clowns group next week. And all different local community organizations. And I also teach a class on storytelling, different aspects of storytelling and literature at Hodges University in their continuing education program, Francis Q. Hayes Continuing Education, Lifelong Learning Center they call it. So that's my storytelling background and how I became a storyteller. And I'm going to tell you today a story that is typical of the kinds of stories I tell. Among the stories I tell, I don't tell only these kinds, but among the stories, and the most popular of the stories I tell, are what are called fractured fairy tales. Have any of you ever heard of fractured fairy tales? Great, oh, this is a very literary group.
With a shiny book?
Funny? Oh yes, and I wrote a book called, thank you for reminding me, James, 10 Fractured Fairy Tales. And here's me on the back cover with a picture of it. I'll send it around at the end so you can look at it. But this is the book that I published through James. He helped me get it published. And so I tell fractured fairy tales. Now, a fractured fairy tale, to those of you who haven't heard of it or if you know exactly what it is, a fractured fairy tale, according to the Oxford Book of Fairy Tales, believe it or not, there is the Oxford Companion to Fairy Tales. There is such a tome. Folklore and fairy tales is an academic discipline, believe it or not. People get PhDs in that subject. And the man who edited this book, the Oxford Companion to Oxford Companion to Fairy Tales, has a PhD and teaches at Michigan University. And there's another woman, Maria Totter, who teaches at Harvard on the same subject. And anyway, in that book, the definition of a fractured fairy tale is a classic fairy tale like Cinderella or Snow White, which keeps the basic plot and characters of the original story, but changes the story in unexpected ways, giving it a modern perspective and ironic twists. So that's what I do with these fractured fairy tales. I take a classic fairy tale and I change it, mainly not just for adults. I do it mostly for adults, but I also do it for children. I change it to modernize it and giving it a modern perspective and ironic twist. I modernize it by bringing in modern anachronisms and references. And how I developed each of the stories, I said to myself, what is the essence of this story? What is the unique essence that gives this story its magical, classical quality? And each story, among the famous ones, there's not that many that are famous. Grimm's Brothers published 200 of these stories, but only about a dozen of them or so are the ones that we know. But what is it about these famous classic fairy tales that gives them their unique essence and makes them magical and gives them their appeal? And each one does have something about it that's unique. And I'll give you an example of the story that I'm going to tell you. The one I'm going to tell you is a fractured version of the Frog Prince. Any of you know the Frog Prince? It's one of the classic Grimm's Brothers fairy tales. And the essence and the unique essence of the Frog Prince is sex. It's really a story about the battle of the sexes, because the frog wants to sleep with the princess, literally, right? And by the way, these fairy tales were not told necessarily for children. There was no such thing as children's literature when these fairy tales were first originated. There was no separation between children's literature and adult literature. And they were told for adults, and this is very much told for adults, as you'll see. So I took that essence and I modernized it. And in modernizing the essence of these stories, I make them my own. So they're no longer, I take off from the original, but they're my own creativity. So I am going to tell you now my fractured version of the Frog Prince, and look for the modern references. The Frog Prince, and my version. Well, I have a title, but I'll tell you the title at the end, because otherwise it'll give it away. So my fractured version of the Frog Prince is as follows. Once upon a time, there was a king, all of whose daughters were beautiful. But the youngest was the most beautiful of them all, and the most spoiled. Her name was Charlotte. One day, Charlotte was playing in the garden of the castle, throwing her golden ball up in the air, and watching it glitter and glisten in the sun, and catching it when it came down again. This was her favorite childhood toy, and although she was now quite the grown-up young lady, she still loved throwing her golden ball up in the air, watching it glisten and glitter in the sun, and then catching it when it came down again. But one time, she threw it up, and she missed catching it when it came down. It fell into the well where she could not reach it, and she thought she had lost it forever, and began to cry. Oh, 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 she cried. All of a sudden, a voice called out to her, "Princess! Princess, why are you crying?" She turned around to see where the voice was coming from, and saw a frog stick its big, ugly head up out of the water. And here, oh, my ball has fallen into the well, and I cannot reach it. I can get it for you. But what will you give me in return? Oh, anything you want, dear frog. My gown, my pearls, my jewels, even my golden crown. I do not want your gown, your pearls, your jewels, or your golden crown. But if you will promise to cherish me and let me be your playmate and sit beside you at the table and eat from your golden plate and drink from your silver cup and sleep in your silken bed, then I will crawl down into the well and bring you back your golden ball. Well, Princess Charlotte looked at that big, ugly head and that green, slimy skin. Ooh! But she really wanted her golden ball. Sure, dear frog. Anything you want, you got it. Once he had her word, the frog dove down into the well, head first, and returned with the princess's golden ball in his mouth. He threw it on the grass. The princess stooped down, picked it up, and ran off with it. Wait for me, said the frog. I cannot run as fast as you. Princess Charlotte paid him no attention. She ran home as fast as her royal legs would carry her, slammed the door behind her, and forgot all about the poor frog and the promises she had made to him. Well, that night at the dinner table, when Princess Charlotte was sitting down to eat with her father the king and the other royal members of the court, something came crawling up the marble staircase. Splish, splash, splish, splash. When it reached the top step, it knocked at the palace door. Princess, youngest princess, let me in. Who is that? Said the king, the father. So Princess Charlotte told her father what had happened. Go and let him in. When you make a promise, you have to keep it. So Princess Charlotte went and opened the door. The frog hopped in after her and followed her all the way to her chair. Let me up beside you, he called out. Princess Charlotte hesitated. The father grew angry. Once the frog was on the chair, he wanted to get on the table. And once he was on the table, He hopped over to her golden plate. He hopped right in to her golden plate and landed in the mashed potatoes. He sank all the way to the bottom, blissfully stuffing his face with mashed potatoes as he went. Then he waded in the gravy, nestled in the vegetables, and chomped down on the meat with his mouth open. "Why aren't you eating your dinner?" the king said. "I've lost my appetite," said she. Then dessert was served. It was rice pudding with a cherry on top. The frog dove down in, literally, devoured the whole thing, topped it off with the cherry, and then belched. Princess Charlotte fainted. She woke just in time to see the frog hop from the table, or rather, I should say, plop from the table, because he was too full to hop, onto the chair, and then plopped from the chair onto the floor. Then he waddled across the room with a beer in one hand and the remote in the other, climbed up on the couch and started channel surfing until he came to a football game between the Miami Dolphins and the Georgia Bullfrogs. The Georgia Bullfrogs were his favorite team, of course. Then he fell asleep and started snoring, just as if he had been married for 20 years. Princess Charlotte took this opportunity